Hi there. Welcome to the Kindness Advantage podcast. I am your host, Cindy Rowe. And normally I have a podcast that in 10 minutes or less, you learn about ways to incorporate kindness into your personal and professional life. But today I have a special guest. I am excited to bring on a friend from my past onto the show, and we are going to have a little conversation. Welcome, Dr. Michelle. How are you?
Hey, Cindy, I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I am excited for my listeners to hear a little bit about your story and what you do. So, why don't we just get right on into it?
You bet. So, I'm Dr. Michelle Rich, and I am a psychologist and also a licensed clinical social worker. And I have been in the mental health field for, 17 years at this point. And I got into the field because I knew I always, even as a little as like 4 years old, always knew I wanted to help people and change the world. And I was told that one person can't change the world. And I was like, hold my juice box. Let's see what we can do here. And so I was in the mental health field for like 17 years. I started off as a school social worker because I wanted to help those who didn't have a voice, and, who needs an advocate more than a kid, right? So did that for 10, 11 years. And then I'm in private practice now. And now I help victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse to learn how to remember what their voice sounds like and to find the future that they thrive in.
Wonderful. How did you pivot to focusing on that narcissistic relationship?
That's everybody's question. And actually, it's kind of not a great story, but I had been in the mental health field, and I remember when I was in grad school, they were talking about like narcissistic personality disorder and all the other personality disorders, and they were like, "Oh, these are so rare, you'll never probably encounter them." So out of all grad school, we spent like one class period talking about all of these things or all of these disorders. And so in my head, I was like, "Oh, okay, it's probably, you're not really going to meet anybody that's like a narcissist or whatever." And turns out, like, I was really actually very good friends with one. And it turns out that that was my pastor. And we ended up finding out some really horrible things. And I just remember being sucker punched. Like, how did I miss this? How did I miss this? Not only for myself, but like to protect my friend who was married to him. And how did I miss that? And what were the signs? And what did I miss? And so I started to do a deep dive. And because I was like, I will never be sucker punched like this again. I will never feel like this again. And then I was learning, oh my gosh, like I was actually married to one. I didn't know. I just thought it was me. I thought I had been, like it was my fault. And like my biological father was a sociopath, and like putting all of these pieces together. And I was like, okay, if I have been in the mental health field and I have realized just now that all of these things have affected me in my past, and I'm just now putting the pieces together, and all of these narcissists have gotten away with all of this stuff with no consequence because nobody knew what was going on. Like, who else has been a victim of these kinds of people? And so again, kept doing the deep dive and kept learning and learning and learning. And so I just realized there's so many people out there that have been victimized by these toxic, horrible, evil people that they need a voice. And they need to know that it's not them, and they need to know that they're not crazy, and they need to know that there's support out there, because there's so many of us out there and they need to have permission to talk about it, to be able to say, no, wait, that was wrong and it wasn't my fault and I do deserve better. And so I kind of just became the self-appointed advocate to help people recognize and learn how to recover from it and thrive after it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I didn't know what narcissism was until I ended a relationship with somebody. And I was like, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, they were totally a narcissist. And I had never ever experienced that in my life. And just after you remove yourself from that, I think is when you get to see it more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like there now I understand, and now I know what I will not tolerate, and I can almost identify it pretty quickly
Mhm.
when somebody is talking with me or in like a friendship or relationship. Like, I think you see those red flags pretty
Absolutely.
quickly once you're aware. So, how do you help people with those mindset shifts so that they can move forward and become their best, wonderful selves?
Well, and I think so in the beginning, a lot of times people don't even realize what's happening. Like you said, right? Like when you're in it, you don't really see. Somebody had told me one time, like, it's hard to see a red flag when it's coming at you,
Right.
right? And then when you get some perspective and you see it kind of blowing, like it's much easier to see it,
Mhm.
after the fact when it's not coming at you. And so once people start to recognize, oh my gosh, what was happening, and this wasn't, maybe it wasn't just me, um, you start to validate that experience for them and encourage them to, as your podcast and your platform, right, is to be kind to themselves, because they're coerced and they're conditioned to blame themselves for everything, and so kindness goes out the window, right? They learn to be kind to everybody else, but they stop being kind to themselves. And so it's giving that mindset shift and giving that permission and that validation to know you deserve to heal. This was actually a traumatic thing that you went through, and you deserve to give some of the kindness that you're so graciously giving to everybody else. Give it to yourself, like turn it inward instead of always focusing outward. And it's a process, right? 'Cause you have to unlearn some things. But having people see that they're not alone and that it wasn't their fault, that's the first step to help them kind of connect those dots, and then to start to be able to move forward and find that future that they really thrive in. It's learning to shift from putting the focus like outward to turning it inward to themselves.
I think that's so important. And honestly, I don't know about you, but I was not raised about, learning about self-care
Mhm.
or self-kindness. Um, and nobody ever told me, go ahead and take a break and, veg out and relax a little bit. Nobody ever told me that it was important to get out in nature and just be. Nobody, like, that was not shared with me as a child. And so after going through traumatic experiences, and like the first one that like I can recall is, well, in my adult life, is my car accident. Right, I was in this horrible car accident, suffered a brain injury. I was forced to relax. I was forced to not do anything, but it actually taught me the power of self-kindness and recovery.
Mhm.
And I had to change the way I looked at things. So when my body said, you need to rest, it
Mhm.
wasn't like Cindy's being lazy,
Mhm.
which my past self would have told myself, Cindy, you need to rest and recover and rejuvenate because that's the only way you're going to make it to dinner time.
Yes.
And like changing the way I was looking at things was so important. And even through, the last 10 years of being a kindness ambassador, I've learned that you cannot really pour from an empty cup. You have to fill yourself up.
Mhm.
And if you want to give your best self to anybody else, you have to give your best self to yourself first. So
Absolutely.
I love that that's, where you start and help them. And it's, I'm sure it's hard for some people to even think that they're valued enough to do that to themselves, or, give that gift to themselves, which is a shame, honestly.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because our culture very much is, and I know, like, you and I grew up in the same general era, and
Mhm.
it was very much a, "Oh, if you're taking time off, you must be lazy. Are you sick? Why are you if you're not sick, get back out there," or whatever, right? "Rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine." But like you said, you cannot pour from an empty cup. And, a lot of people that I work with, they will talk about how, "But I don't have time,"
Mhm.
or "I feel guilty." And so I like to use the metaphor of a car. If you're driving your car and you're, having to get from A to B, wherever that is, and you're low on gas and you're like, "Oh, but I have to get to B. It's going to take time to pull over to the side of the road to the gas station and fill up gas or whatever. I'm just going to pass the gas station and assume that I'll still have enough gas to get to point B." You won't, right? Like, yes, does it take time for you to pull off the road, stop and get gas, and then get back on? Yes, it does. But if you don't, you're never going to get to point B. And another thing too is like, not only does everybody else in your life deserve to have the best version of you, but you deserve to have the best version of you, right? We get this one life, you know, and it's not a dress rehearsal. And if you're not allowing yourself to have the best version of you, right, that's unfair to you, and it's unfair to everybody around you.
Yeah. And you won't be able to reach your full potential, and, you know, and give your gifts that you're meant to give, when you don't see it yourself. Finding your voice and identity. You've mentioned that a couple times. Like, what does that look like for somebody that has gone through such a traumatic experience, and how do you get them? What's the process to get them there? I mean, is there any kind of quick tip or whatever that you can maybe share with our listeners if they're struggling with that aspect?
Yes, and that's one thing I love to offer is things that you can do that help you start to feel better starting today. Not like, oh my gosh, if you do this for 6 months, eventually you'll feel better. But no, like actual strategies and tips that you can use starting today. So I'm glad you asked that, because what happens when we're in these toxic relationships is we become conditioned to ignore our own voice because we're trying to anticipate what the abuser is going to want, think, say, need. And so we're so conditioned to try to stay out of trouble or out of the line of fire that everything we see starts to become seen through the lens of their voice and their opinion. And so trying to remember what your own voice sounds like, that sounds trivial. But a lot of times the survivors that I work with, I will ask them in the beginning, you know, when we first start working together, I'll ask them something like, well, what do you think about whatever? It doesn't matter. And most of the time they will come back and say, well, I did this because it made so-and-so nicer, feel better, happy. They liked it. That was their favorite color. That was their favorite restaurant. And I really have to like dial in with them. Like, no, what do you think about that? And like, it's become such a foreign concept to them to actually be okay with having their own thoughts and feelings about something, that it really is like learning to walk again, to kind of like that metaphor. So what I really encourage people to do, if they're trying to, like, if you recognize that, like, when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror and the first thought is, well, what's so-and-so going to think of this? What's so-and-so going to think of how I look or what I'm wearing or what I said or what I do for a job or however, you know, whatever the situation might be, that's a sign that you're not remembering your own voice, because you're automatically going to the voice of someone else. And no one else deserves to live as that priority and that main voice in your head, right? Like, you were given a voice for a reason. And so what does your voice say? So one thing that I really think you can do right now is ask yourself any question. And I really like this, more simple questions, the better. Like, what do you want for dinner tonight? Even if you can't do it, right? Even if you're like, man, I would really like cake and extra frosting for dinner, right? Not that you can necessarily even do it, but just start by answering the questions honestly. What do I want for dinner tonight? Right? I mean, even if you're still in the relationship, right? Like, even if it's a relationship with a boss, for example, what do I want to do on this project? Well, the boss wants me to do blah, blah, blah. Well, no, what do you want to do? What do you think would be the next best step? Even if you cannot do it, acknowledge to yourself, what would you do if you could?
Yeah.
Right? And it's, okay, what way do I want to turn at the stoplight when I go home from work? Right? What do I want to watch on TV? What cereal do I want in the morning? Any of those things. Like, again, even if you don't actually do it, ask yourself and allow yourself to answer that question, because that's going to start triggering your brain to remember your own voice. And the more you remember your own voice, the more you quiet the voice of the abuser.
That's so good. I love it. Yeah. And that, like you said, it's actionable. You can do it today. And yeah, what do I want for dinner? Yeah. Sometimes I just get tired of like deciding. That's what happens when you live by yourself. Maybe I'll just have chips and salsa. I don't know.
I had that for dinner last night. It was delightful. I highly recommend.
Yeah, that's great. So in our pre-conversation, you did mention that you have co-authored a book that's coming out soon. I would love for you to share a little bit about that, and tell us what we need to know, how we can pre-order it or order it.
So it is called Chasing Rescue. And I co-authored it with someone I know who is also a survivor of narcissistic abuse. And she has authored several other books. And so she came to me and said, like, do you want to do this together? And because when we had talked, I had always told her there's this, and I'm sure many of your listeners may have heard it, but it's some kind of story about where there's like a guy in a flood. And somebody comes up to him in a boat and says, hey, can I help you? And the guy's like, no, God's got me. And then somebody comes up with, something else. And the guy's like, no, I'm waiting for God to rescue me. And like a helicopter comes and is trying to save this guy. And he's like, no, God is, rescuing me. And like, it's like, no, God has just sent you like 3 things to, try to rescue you. And you have to participate though in your own rescue. Mm-hmm. And you have to be willing to grab onto the rope or get on the helicopter or whatever. You have to be willing to participate in your own rescue. And so that's why it's called Chasing Rescue. And it's basically like we both write a little bit in each chapter. Hers is very much, her part is all about her experience. And my part just comes in as like the clinical aspect to kind of make everything make sense. Like, why this does this to your body, how trauma impacts you, and strategies that you can use to address whatever those issues are, and then be able to build on that to move forward. So it's going to be on June 3rd, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, other places that I can't think of right now.
Yeah, that is so exciting. So writing a book is on my to-do list. So I'm very excited that I have an author in my friend group. So love to hear when people do great things. So yeah, I'll put some information into the show notes for sure. I also have your website and Instagram, where they can reach out to you. But it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I know a lot of what we both do supports, mental health awareness, mental health, the well-being of our mental health. And so do you have anything that you'd like to share in regards to how you help your clients, your patients with tackling their mental health and their living a positive well-being, in this crazy society, I guess, that we have?
And you make such a good point, right? We are living in crazy times, and it can be really hard to feel the kindness and feel the joy and enjoy a lot of these things that we have in our lives, because we're so distracted by a lot of the things that we either don't want or can't control. And so what I really would like to reinforce is that kindness really does start with you, for you, because what you have inside is what you're going to exude to the world, right? And the more one person, it's that butterfly effect, right? Like if you're kind to someone, they're going to like be more likely to be kind to someone, and it's going to pay that forward. But when you focus on the external, that can be very overwhelming and feel very much powerless for us. But if you focus on what you can control, right, it starts to like quiet the outside noise, and it starts to really feel very empowering. And what you focus on, you get more of, right? So if another metaphor or analogy is like, I picture that we have 2 gardens, right? One we pay a lot of attention to, right? We nurture it, we weed it, we feed it, with Miracle-Gro or whatever. We water it, we do all the things. And the other one we just don't do anything with, right? One of those gardens is going to be beautiful. The one we don't do anything with is going to be overgrown with weeds and, bugs and whatever. Well, which one do you want to be which one do you want, to be the one that's most important in your life? Is it the one that's filled with all of the yuck, or the one that's beautiful? And so if you're focusing on what you can have control over, and you're doing what you have in the power in your hands to do, to be kind to yourself, to make sure that you're getting what you need, right? To shift that mindset from what does everybody else want me to do to what is my body trying to tell me I need right now, right? You referenced it when you were recovering from the car accident, right? You didn't get to just say, well, what does everybody else want me to do? You had to listen to your body that said, no, Cindy, you need to take a nap right now.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to take a nap because I'm lazy. It's, I need to take a nap because what is my body telling me I need? My body's telling me right now I need rest. So being kind to being kind to everything really starts with being kind to yourself and having that, like shifting that focus from the external world to the internal self, because that's all we can control. Right. And it's kind of like having a good night's sleep. Right. If I get a good night's sleep, if you get a good night's sleep tonight, does that mean we don't have any problems tomorrow? No, but it means we're best able to handle those problems if they were to surface. Right.
Yeah.
So we have a good night's sleep. So
Right.
that's kind of the same thing with being kind to yourself. If you're kind to yourself and focusing on what you can do, whenever something comes up to you that's like a curveball, you're going to be better able to handle it than if you hadn't been practicing kindness and self-care.
Yeah. I'm so glad you made that point, because when I speak, I share my story, and then I usually end with the slide after my story that says, what I learned was that kindness starts with you. And you get to decide, right? That's a choice. And when you decide, when you build your life with intentional kindness, that's the game changer. That's when, and like when I learned 10 years ago the power of kindness, I was, just in a crappy relationship. I hated my job. Like, it wasn't like earth shattering things, right? But I felt dark and depressed.
Mhm.
And it was a friend that told me to do this act of kindness. And I thought that was really silly, but I did it because I didn't know what else to do. I had tried everything. And then I did it for my 40th birthday. I did the 31 days, which I still do. But had I not done that, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have been able to get through my divorce the way I did. I don't think I would have been able to get through my car accident the way I did. And I know I wouldn't have gotten through it with the loss of my husband if I didn't have that core value of kindness.
Mm.
I wouldn't have gotten through it as quickly. And I wouldn't even say I'm through it with grief, because I don't think you ever get through it. But like, it doesn't ever end. You just kind of grow into it, I think. But I've been able to get on my feet quicker because of that. And I am more concerned about what does Cindy need today? And I'll show, if I can give that to me, then I can show up for everybody else when I'm able. But I need to do it for me. And being able to step on stage and tell those stories, I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't have that value of kindness and live it, and it, I share this all the time. It's not softness. It's not weakness. And it's not basic. Like, it's so deep, much deeper than we realize. And when you can listen to yourself, listen to your voice, and know that we have a choice and we have our own voice and it's worthy, then we can really make a difference, not only in our lives, but in everybody else's lives too. Yeah, I'm a much better person now than I was 10 years ago.
Well, and I've watched your journey. I've had the privilege of watching your journey. And just, I just, every time I click on, I see a new story, especially over the last, couple years, I'm just amazed and inspired by you and all that you've been able to do and still share with the world in spite of what you've been going through. So you're definitely a light.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. It's not easy every day, right? But it's a choice. And I even say this too, like, I am not perfect. I have days where I do not feel very kind to myself or to other people, but I still keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I allow myself, give myself grace to have those days. What's different now is when I act out and it's not kind, I actually feel bad. 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's their problem. Whatever. Now I'm like, oh my goodness, that's not how I want to be. And I can go back. And although, when I teach in schools, we always talk about how we can't take back our words, right? You can't put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste container, but I can still apologize, and I can be authentic and vulnerable and tell them, and that comes across, and people will accept that more than just like, well, yeah, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said that, like,
Right.
and that was not kind, and I holy cow, I was hot for a minute, and I'm really sorry. Can I reword it and come
Yes.
back or whatever, and people appreciate that vulnerability, and that's hard. That takes
It's hard.
strength and courage to like say, hey, I sucked at that moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, yeah, that was not who I wanted to be, but
Yeah.
realizing it too,
Yeah.
that's that takes a lot of practice, and that takes a lot of hard work. And just like what you're talking about, with these abuse survivors, it takes a lot of hard work for them, but man, they are so worth it.
Mhm.
And I hope they see that, and I'm grateful that there's somebody out there focusing on that, because I was not aware of it until about 5.5 years ago, 6 years ago. And that, yeah, it's crazy what they can do and make you feel so good. And they're
Mhm.
so nasty, people.
Mhm. And that, like, just like kindness, right? I feel like most people don't understand what
Yeah,
narcissism is. I think most people, if they don't know, which if they don't know, like, it's probably because they, just haven't met anybody like that which is awesome. But they think it's just somebody who likes to talk about themselves a lot, right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's part of it, but really it's the control and the power and the manipulation and the gaslighting and the trauma and all of these things where it's just the breaking down and the eroding of the self, right? That
yeah,
they're trying to do to the other person, making them question everything. But I also think like people don't necessarily understand when they hear the word kindness either, right? Like they think,
mhm,
oh, you're just being nice. No, it's really way more than that,
yeah,
right?
it's totally different. And
Yeah.
will be my TED Talk. So
I love it.
I'm pitching it. So yes, difference. There is a huge difference between kindness and niceness, and
Mhm.
especially in the workplace. And I think that's where people get confused. Like kindness doesn't belong in the workplace. No,
Mm.
niceness does not belong in the workplace.
Yeah.
Kindness does. So,
Kindness.
well, the conversation has been great. I so appreciate this. I have your website as drmichelle.com,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And you're also on Instagram as Dr. Michelle. I will put it all in the show notes for everybody else. But do you have any parting words that you'd like to share with the listeners before we close out?
Yes. And my favorite reminder is your future has not happened yet, so don't write it off. Right?
Uh,
Like you still have plenty of time to make your future how you want to make it. So don't think that the future has to be just like the past. It hasn't happened yet, so you can make it however you want to make it.
yeah, you are the author. I love that, Debs. That's great.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your insight, which I think our listeners will find very valuable. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. And like I close out every week, together we create waves of change through kindness. Thanks for listening.